Hi all, let's continue looking at the games of Emanuel Lasker. He's arguably one of the most underrepresented world chess champions on YouTube. I think many people know he was world champion for so long for a very good reason. He was just super solid, super strong, super accurate, even in his 50s and beyond. This game in New York 1924, his opponent here was Saveilly Tartakower. So this is round 21. And let me just show you New York 24 to give you an idea of the players. Frank Marshall standing. Then there's Tartakower there. Maroczy, as in Maroczy Binds, Alexander Alekhine, Richard Reti, one of the leading hypermodernists, Bogolojbo. Please don't tell me about how to pronounce Bogolojbo. Please, I've had enough of that. It's the biggest torture given to me, okay? Worse than form porn torture? Anyway, so Yates, Fred Yates, Capablanca, Janowski, Ed Lasker, not to be confused with Emanuel Lasker, looking across that row. And also, as a little treat for you, I've prepared another slide here. Before we get into Tartakower, I always say he's got witty quotations. And for the lazy, let me bring some of them to you. And in fact, as a bonus, even a Lasker quotation. He said of Lasker, Lasker thought that his rationalism rendered him immune from the surprises of chess theory. Well, I think Lasker was just simply much more accurate than most of these other players. And if he was playing the person for win probability, that's ahead of its time as well, putting the game in the context of the opponent and all the other contextual factors, the tournament, maybe the heat, putting the entire game in context, then you have a more holistic view of the game as a win probability exercise. So Lasker's, I think totally ahead of his time, and maybe he doesn't care about the theory at the time. But anyway, Tartakower also mentioned tactics is knowing what to do when there is something to do. Strategy is knowing what to do when there is nothing to do. I really like that one. And also I really love this one. The blunders are all there on the board waiting to be made. Definitely in blitz chess as well. They're all definitely made quite a lot, every other move, as we know. This one, some part of a mistake is always correct. Yeah, I believe that. Sometimes, for example, a combination, if only it had been played in a certain move order, for example, it would have been much better. So yeah, he's really profound and witty, and there's a lot of truth to a lot of his quotations. I think his quotations are worth studying as well. Anyway, let's get into the game without further ado. So Saveilly Tartakower here, the English opening, c4. We have Lasker playing e5, and now a little surprise from their previous encounter, Saveilly Tartakower plays a3. So this is 1924. Their previous encounter I'm referring to is in 1909, the St. Petersburg tournament, where knight c3 was played by Tartakower. And Lasker, it's interesting for what happens in this game. The bishop seems on a passive square inside the pawn chain. But later, Lasker played for d5 and got a reasonably good game out of the opening and went on to win in 53 moves. So that's the backdrop here. But here we have a novelty move, a3. This really discourages the bishop from ever venturing out of the pawn chain, actually. We have knight f6, and especially this move, any bishop c5, there's now tempo gainers, along with b4 and c5 later. It's pretty off-putting. So Lasker does actually maintain the bishop within his own side of the board, bishop e7, while not even going to the fourth rank. If he plays bishop c5 as an example, here's an example which is a disaster. An immediate c5. Why would you want to go into that? Why would you want to even put a pigeonhole? There's always b4 and c5 later. Sometimes you can get away with this. Maybe if later you have c6 and bishop, going from a7 to b8 and then across that diagonal. But the bishop being on e7 seems, it seems fairly sensible given white's opening. We have queen c2, Lasker castles, knight c3. d6, knight f3, rook e8, bishop e2, bishop f8. We have white castling, knight c6, d4. Now, here, if, for example, h3, I think black could get away with e4 and support that pawn. This would be quite nice for black. Black's doing quite well here. So d4, and we have bishop g4, and because the queen's on c2, there is real pressure now on d4, you know, threatening to take and take. White closes that centre, knight e7, and we have a kind of tango manoeuvre, which I absolutely love in my own games recently. But the bishop, the issue is the bishop is a bit stuck in its own pawn chain right now. h3, bishop d7. Taking off an f3, just giving white the light square bishop, can't really be that good, can it? I think technically white's doing very well there. So good decision to maintain the light square bishop and just weaken slightly the dark squares there for white. We have knight h2, queen c8, and in a modern way, this provocation anyway, that you know, bishop g4 encouraged the closing of the centre, was a success in its own right. It wasn't a loss of tempo, because with the centre closed, this is quite interesting. And also it seems as though here, after e4, knight g6, the knight's very comfortably looking at these dark squares. And in fact, Saveilly Tartakower seems to not care about the subtle downsides on his dark squares with his next move. He plays f4. It kind of gives black some liberation aspects, especially this bishop, helping to sort of untangle the bishop from the position, to liberate it. Sometimes it can become a killer piece here. And also black's use of the e5 square. It's a little bit positionally suspect, this move, it seems. So Lasker took it, getting that e5 square. And in fact, after bishop takes, it's an interesting decision. Do you actually use the e5 square and leave that bishop around? Well, it swings and roundabouts. In fact, this bishop was just snapped off, so leaving Lasker with the bishop without the counterpart. And you'll remember, like 2 days ago, he completely demolished Alexander Alekhine when Alekhine gave him a bishop without a counterpart. Can this really be such a lethal weapon in this position, this bishop here? It's a bit sleepy, isn't it? It awakens here with bishop e7. White has that seemingly upside of the dynamic f-file. But rook f8, some prophylaxis for f7 now. Queen d3, and now another move which is dual purpose actually, not just protects and reinforces f7, it gives d7 as a parking space for the knight that could use the e5 square. We have queen g3. White is arranging things tactically, but black is so solid here. If rook 4 to f2, you know, for example, knight d7, and this position with the bishop coming to f6, it seems this is a beautiful position for black. Black's really dominating the dark squares. For example, here, knight e5, black's better there, slightly. So we have queen g3, and now queen d8, so setting up a kind of potentially dangerous battery. That bishop and queen, the common squares, the h4 square, in conjunction with moving the knight back. The bishop has to eye here h5, otherwise there's going to be knight h5 as well, forking queen and rook. We have knight d1. It looks logical to try and use that f5 square, to come in and use f5. Knight d7, yes, the dark square pain is being revealed here for white already. This knight, is it really going to be permitted for this fantastic square? Knight e3, the e5 square. We have bishop g5 skewering the rook and knight, and already black is doing extremely well, actually, extremely well in this position. Rook g4 is played. If rook f5, then bishop h4, and this position after knight e5 is really, really nice, because there's a big threat of g6 trapping that rook. For example, here, knight g6, this position, the rook's not really going anywhere, and you know that can happen as well, forking the queen and rook quite easily. Let's have a look at this again. So white's really already in big trouble. You know, if instead of rook f5, rook f2, then that battery, that common square, is revealed. You know, bishop h4. So white really is in trouble on the dark squares, it seems here, in tactical trouble. So rook g4. Just for one moment there, let's look at rook h5 again, bishop h4. If queen g4 here, then g6, indeed g6 there. And then here, this, you know, again, it's trouble with the queen and rook around. So rook g4, and now f6, and this does set up this not so subtle threat of h5 sometimes, just to win that rook in broad daylight with a pawn. Queen f2, So if knight f3, that unfortunately hangs the knight there. That's not technically possible. So queen f2. And now h5. Yeah. Lasker really, you might think, he hasn't done a thing in this game. And there's no way any YouTuber in their right mind will cover this game, because Black really hasn't played in any great style here. Black has not apparently played in an attacking way, has not played in a creative way. Is it just that Black is just playing on his trump card that was given to him freely, that dark square bishop, and is winning material with it? White's pieces are just awful, and the strategically strong e5 square has just been given to Black on a plate. Tartakower has given all the ingredients, which are now basically repackaged and thrown back at Tartakower to win material. That's essentially what's happened here. And yeah, it's a loss of material for White coming up. Rook g3, just h4. And now, okay, there's a slight trap here in this position. What would you play in this position? And I'll give you either 500 points or minus 500 points. There is something to be aware of tactically in this position. So Black to play here, what would you play to try and win material? 10 seconds to pause the video. Bishop h5. Yes, this is the correct way to win that rook. Not knight e5, so that 500 points if you found that. Not knight e5, minus 500, because guess what White plays? Yeah, rook takes g5. Yeah, that dangerous battery actually on f8. Yeah, you've got to be careful here. But bishop h5 definitely wins material in a non-glamorous way. So bishop takes, knight takes. Okay, these knights look a bit dangerous, maybe. So how does Black consolidate here? Queen e8. We have bishop f3, knight e5. A pair of knights come off. Okay, White wins one pawn here. And here we have bishop takes, so simplifying further. And now f5. We have e takes, rook takes, rook e1. If bishop g4, that doesn't help because there's queen e3 check, and either mass simplification or losing the rook. So that doesn't help. So rook e1, pardon me, rook e1, hitting the queen. We have queen takes b2, bishop g4. The queen comes back for check. Okay, it looks to be a bit dangerous, this bishop e6, right? Is that, if the rook moves, is that dangerous? So guess what Lasker plays here? You don't really want to allow bishop e6, right? Is this position good enough for Black to win? Well, at the moment, also the bishop's pinned. So for 100 points here, Black to play. What would you play here with Black? Okay, rook a f8. So there's no threat because of queen takes at the moment. So we have queen e7. And now check. King h1. You know, if g3, there's all sorts of things. There's horrible checks. So king h1. We have rook e5. And here it's quite safe for Black now to do this. So rook takes, d takes. Okay, he loses a pawn. But there's a big passed pawn now in the centre, e4, which is pushed, offering the exchange of queens. Queen e7. If queen takes b7, then check, check. And rook b8 is a nice common square to use for crashing through with rook b1, absolutely winning. So queen e7 here. We have queen f6. Queen takes b7. Check. But this kind of transposes into the same idea to use b8 now, because there's another key check, which means rook b8 is facilitated, which is played, and that's really vicious here for that rook b1. Queen d7, rook b1 check, crushing. King f2, e3 check, king e2, rook b2 check, king e1, queen c3 check, king f1, queen c1, and White resigned here. Not a moment too soon. Bishop d1 will be checkmate there. So a totally unspectacular game, but this is meat and potato chess. If the opponent gives you a dark square bishop, how would you kind of arrest the f-file pressure? He did so brilliantly. Bishop e8. He sidestepped a tactical trap. He won the exchange. He consolidated in a fantastic way. He created a common square on b8 later to crash through with the rook. He bypassed all the tactical traps. He really exploited that dark square bishop to the maximum. White basically was essentially weakening his own dark squares with the f4. So instructive mistakes from white here, drastically punished by Emanuel Lasker. So yeah, very, very interesting how the accumulation of small advantages there played out. If we just recap how, just for my own record, how the dark square bishop was just given up by white. How did that happen again? It was this move. It's a rather naive looking move. The whole plan, if it relies on bishop f4, this is just, it looks as though it's asleep at the moment, but it comes to life, and black's use of the e5 square. It's pretty instructive positional stuff, I believe. And in terms of accuracy rating, Saveilly Tartakower's accuracy was 31 average centre pawn loss, and Emanuel Lasker's was only 13, so he really did play like a computer almost, computer accuracy. 13 average centre pawn loss. Black's accuracy means, actually, games like this often go out of the radar. There's nothing spectacular about it. It's just totally logical, ruthless chess. Really quite objective about each position. And I think in the whole context of win probability, factoring in the opponent and everything else, he's totally ahead of his time, basically. A very, very accurate player ahead of his time, in my view. I hope you got something from this. Comments, questions, likes, subscribes, all appreciated. And if you want to challenge me, by the way, on Chessworld, Kingscrusher TV or bit.ly/Chessworld, if you register there, I'll be able to invite you for a game soon after. Thanks so much.